All right, thank you so much for coming. And we are joined by two people remotely today. So I am Fanny Lakoubai. I'm a Web3 advisor to artists and collectors. And I am very, very honored today to be joined by Merel first, with founder and managing director of the Next Museum in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. We also have Poppy, who is the chief curator of X Museum, and Seb, who is director and CEO as ACMI, which is the Australian Centre for the Moving Image in Melbourne. So the previous talk talked about diversity. I think we have like a lot of diversity, like geographical diversity, and you will see during the talk like very diverse projects as well that we will use as a base for the discussion about how art institution use Web3. So before we start, I actually have a question for the audience, not for the panelists. Who in the room knows what Web3 is? Okay, so we have maybe a third. And so I just want to take a minute to mention a few things to just know what we're talking about here. Obviously, Tezos is a blockchain, and we have heard a lot about NFTs. And NFTs is part of the tools and the new technology that is part of Web3. But there are many other tools that are included in the Web3 like magic acronym, right? Like, I mean, this is something still a little opaque and hard to understand because it's very technical. But just to give you a few ideas, there's a lot of blockchain-based tools that are used for privacy, security, decentralization. There are a lot of new options to use and to experiment with. And so it's no need to talk about it like in a too technical manner, because I think the best is actually to lead with the examples. And this is my cue to Merel. Actually, maybe if you want to start by telling us about your institution and how the Next Museum is involved with any blockchain-related projects.
Yes, thank you. So Next Museum. Next Museum is a dedicated space for new media art in Amsterdam. It's a physical space, and we work on the intersection of art, tech, science, and sound. And we've converted a TV studio in 2020 into a large-scale exhibition space where we show technical installations by up-and-coming artists, and where we commission approximately 50% of more of the works. And we work with talent specifically on the intersection of art and tech. We also have residency programs combining art and sound, art and movement, and also art and science. We have education programs, and we are currently building our first collection offline, but also online, implementing Web3 technologies. We started in the middle of a pandemic. I think it's important to mention because it was the hardest time ever to start a physical space dependent on visitors. But it was actually the most exciting time in history to set up a museum combining art and tech, because the whole industry has completely changed. It's been the biggest disruption in the art world in years. So we are actually incredibly excited to be on the forefront of this industry at the moment. The things we do for Web3 start with a mission. Our mission is to always show, seek, question, and debate what's next in art and tech. And working with emerging technologies is part of our DNA. And it's our mission to research Web3, to test and learn, and to share whatever we've learned. Some examples are you can collect digital memories inside the museum. We call them proof of attention protocols. We want the visitor to actually look at the work, answer some questions, and then they collect a free NFT. We allowed people to live mint a part of a festival, a party we did. So you live mint a DJ set with a visual artwork and your own 15 seconds of it. But we've also started a research project looking into collecting and shared collecting of artworks. And this is where it gets really exciting also for visitors. And the last one, I think, is community building. So Web3 offers a lot of interesting ways to build communities without having to collect data and collect information. But actually, you can be totally anonymous, but be part of our community by connecting your wallet, by collecting the digital memories, and then participate in the ecosystem. So these are a few examples.
Thank you. I'm going to you, Seb, because with ACMI, like there's, like the museum was already involved in digital art. So I'm wondering, like, how you made the jump, the leap of faith toward more like blockchain use, which I'm really excited to hear about.
Yeah, look, it's fascinating hearing of Merrill. We're a much older museum, so we're a museum in the middle of Melbourne that birthed out of the State Film Archive, State Film Centre in 1942, but we launched as the Australian Centre for the Moving Image in 2002 and have just celebrated our 20th birthday under the new name. So we're a museum that has always needed to display, collect and preserve new forms of art, and we also commission a lot of media art. Very early on in 2003, we commissioned Julian Oliver and others to make a entirely virtual world of our building in the square. We are located in Federation Square in Melbourne. So we've been at this sort of space of emerging tech for a very, very long period of time. So we've been commissioning works that have been, more blockchain critical in recent times. A work by Fire Pit Collective called Hyper Echo, which was a game world that decayed and really questioned this notion of permanence and persistence that is at the heart of some of the debates around the blockchain. And also this other work by Xanthi Dobby, which was a critique of this notion of preservation for the long term. So we've been commissioning artists who work critically around tech and media. We've also been doing a huge amount of collective collecting. So we have a large interactive media collection, including a lot of Australian-made video games. And so Melbourne is a real hot spot for video games that are really contemporary art. And what we've been learning through this process, of course, that digital objects are in fact more fragile than many of the analog works that we hold. And of course, digital art exists in systems that require power, maintenance, software development to keep them alive. So we've been doing a lot of work in that longer-term digital preservation space, learning from others like Rhizome. The other relevant thing, I think, is that we also run a large incubator and co-working space called X. So we have a lot of startups and also a lot of creatives making works that are exploring Web3, but are also trying to work at that edge of what does that mean for community, and what does that mean in a non-financialized way? And I think that's what's really fascinating is now, as we've moved into a space where a lot of the hype has disappeared from the space and the money, that we're actually getting into where real innovations may now be explored and made by artists.
And there's already like a few common threads between your two experience, like the importance of the education. I think that's among other things. But Poppy, X Museum is a bit more recent venture than ACMI, for example. And I would love to know like more from a digital native initiative and how you're actually involving blockchain and in your exhibitions and programming.
X Virtual is, as you said, is a very new program run by X Museum. Actually, we because X Museum is already quite new, we just opened our museum in 2020, and since then, like 2 years ago, we started the research of Web3, of how to make like virtual exhibitions on the current framework. So to simply put, X Virtual is a digital art platform that fuse new artistic 3D spaces. And in other words, we're bringing artistic virtual worlds to everyone with internet access. And we, in this April, we just launched the first X Virtual Incubator program. That's the first project of X Virtual. And we commission artists to create audiovisual space on X Virtual platform. And the whole X Virtual platform is built on Mozilla Hubs, and we did some VIs, UIs, and UX. So the whole platform is more adapted to the language of X Museum. And we also organize virtual gatherings, including workshops and talks. So far, because we're so new, we just launched our project in this August. So far, we have organized like 2 workshops. So it is basically like a very gamified experience where the artists we commissioned are leading the workshop, and there are 25 participants involved in the workshop in the virtual space. So I don't know if it is possible for me to share my screen if I can show a very short video.
I don't think so. I don't think this is set up like for the
Right.
for the setup. But I'm sure people will be able to find out afterwards because it's very visual
course.
experiences online.
Yeah, of course. So I would just like quickly summarize what we did for X Virtual Incubator. So we invited 4 artists from different cultural backgrounds, and we commissioned them to make 4 different like virtual worlds. And some artists make. We commissioned an artist called Gabriel Mason. I'm sure a lot of like audiences already know him very well, and he is very close to this whole Tezos and Sometime project. So he did a audio-visual space of Brazil, and he used a lot of like late funk to conceptually thread violence and freedom together in this virtual world. And we also commissioned Kim Lupton, who is a British artist, working on hyperreal images and fantastical world. And we also commissioned Cheese Talk, who is a very young and talented Chinese artist. She trained 3 AI chatbots, so you were able to like go to her space and chat with her chatbots. And we also have a very kind of like a meditative, minimalistic space where you can experience some spatial audio. So yes, as you said, it's very experience-based. So it's all about like login and play.
And I think this is maybe to help also, like there are a lot of institutions who are looking at the new technologies, and you know, we've seen like some adoption, like some very very mainstream, or like you know, in the news, like the British Museum is doing digital twins, and kind of like a version of blockchain-based postcards, if you want. And a lot of times these experiments, I mean, it's very new, as you said, but sound a little random, right? And the big question when you see most of the news is, but why? Why did you do that? Why did you want to get in there? And I think, I mean, that's a question I'm actually going to ask you, because this is, but why, Meryl?
Yeah, so I think for us it's super clear, but we've also taken our time to think about it. So we didn't, out of, like, FOMO should not be a reason ever to do it. I think a lot of institutions might have kind of jumped in there to say we want to be the first. So we've taken our time, we looked at the market, we looked at behavior, also not just NFTs, but also gallery spaces, metaverses, decentralized research called DeSci. So there is so much you can use the blockchain for. And for us, we started with, like I said, like our DNA. So it's our purpose to research. So one of the things we do, our purpose is to research, and therefore we test and learn, we write a paper, and we publish the paper for other institutions to learn from. And that is the purpose of one of the shows we are going to be doing. And another one is when we build the gallery. Again, we're building a virtual gallery to sell NFTs. And it is merchandise NFTs. So like you said, it's a digital postcard or a digital poster. And on the other hand, there's the kind of like fine art, limited editions. And we are finding ways to work with partners to figure out what is the best price for the artist, what is the best split, and how do you differentiate a merchandising NFT and a fine art NFT. And no one knows this yet, but someone needs to do it.
Yeah, and document it, especially for more people to get in.
Yeah, exactly. So this is something we're going to be doing, we're going to be testing, and we're going to document and publish what the findings were. And I think the most important thing is be just really, really, really transparent. As an institution, do not mess around. Don't say you're doing something to support the arts, but actually there's no artist involved in the drop. Or don't say you support a good cause, but then when you actually read, only 10% goes to a good cause if the NFT sales are higher than $100,000 So I think the purpose is the most important thing, and communicate why and what.
Yeah, and you mentioned the word mission. I think this is always about the question of alignment. It should not be completely out of the blue. And I'm wondering, Seb, how was same thing, like the discussions at ACMI, like to make that leap of faith?
Yeah, look, we've been doing a lot of work in the digital space, and I guess a lot of my career has been in exploring museums and digital, and it's been about developing amongst the staff the necessary, I don't want to say literacies, it's more like capabilities to be able to interpret and make sense of the research coming out of many other places, and our friends at the Serpentine, friends at Rhizome, at HEC at Basel. There's lots and lots of people doing really interesting and great work and research with artists, and also within the university field as well. But the ability for staff and even for younger curators and managers to make sense of what that means requires a different level of capabilities and experience within the space, and experimentation. So, we're very conscious of the effect, particularly a state-run museum can have in this space. So this is why you haven't seen us leap in fully fledged, although we do a lot of work around the edges of the space. And of course, the question that I often bring back to people is, what is the blockchain providing us that we can't do in other ways? And I think that's been a thing for us. Visitors come to the museum now in Melbourne. Before COVID, we were getting about 1.5 million visitors a year. And visitors can now take home, using this thing we call the lens, things that they collect through their visit. It's physical. It doesn't require or use blockchain. It could, but it doesn't need to. So there's a lot of questioning around this, and I think because we're so close to the game art community here, they've been very skeptical of the needs of the need to use the blockchain within this space too. So that's where we are really exploring what are actually the benefits, and what are the risks? What are the cultural risks for our communities of creators around this? We are, of course, in quite a different position to many others in the world. We have a state government that funds the arts and artists. We have a lot of communities, government community support for experimental practice here too. So we're in a different space, and the need to financialise all of the things is perhaps a little bit reduced in Melbourne. So I'm always conscious that the context matters. That said, huge amount of work going on in virtual worlds, huge amount of work going on around innovative user experiences, all of this sort of stuff. So it is that piece of what does the blockchain make possible that wasn't possible anyway, and that's a question I think a lot of us are still trying to figure out, and that's exciting, but it's also one where we need to take care.
Yeah, and I think Poppy, I have a question that is a bit more like a segue from Seb's comment on the virtual worlds, and you mentioned the gamification. I think this for a purely virtual museum, you know, like how, I mean, a lot of these tools like allow for more engagement, right? And online before for museums was really not an obvious choice, right? So you going with a fully digital project, like what have you seen, or like what have you seen work and work not so well to engage an audience and present the works of the artists online?
I think the whole idea, like for trying to set up X Virtual as a whole, like a online experience and a whole virtual project, was actually stems from like our understanding, like me and my team, curatorial team. We thinking of the pre-Web3 exhibitions, like the experience is primarily based on creating physical experience, and even that applies to new media art and even time-based art. For example, like it's especially performances. They're about building a scenario, and they're so different with like virtual ones. But Web3 actually introduces a new methodological approaches to the artists, because in Web3, works are created and presented and even circulated entirely in the digital sphere. And this has posed a question to us as museums and institutions, is that we can't simply deploy the curatorial or the communication strategy from Web 2 to Web 3. And thinking of traditional exhibitions and mediation of the exhibition and even documentation of the exhibitions, they're largely dependent on art as an object and its aura. So in another sense, it is dependent on accessibility, as you said, like for physical experience, and that accessibility frames a certain community. And I don't think that there had existed an exhibition that is 100% international before we had online exhibitions. So here, I would say the most notable changes for us is about audience and visitor groups. And now we're actually facing a true global community.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, and so we went from physical to digital, and now I'm like bringing it back to the physical. How do you actually deal with this? You know, you have a physical brick and mortar museum, and then Christian Paul was actually mentioning earlier this morning, it's like nobody wants to see a reproduction of the actual building in a virtual world, right? Like it's like there's so many early like builds and worlds, like virtual worlds where you have houses with a toilet and a gutter. It doesn't rain. Like I don't need to go to the bathroom in the metaverse, right? So I'm wondering how, you know, or if you totally separate it, or how you integrate both the engagement, like for people on site and the people remote.
So this was actually one of the questions that excited me most, and one of the things for...
What, my other questions is not exciting?
No, but I think the example we have is perfect to really bring it to life. So I totally agree. When you build a virtual world, you do not have gravity, for example. So why put a table there, and why put paintings on the wall, or even digital works on the wall? So one of the examples is we commissioned an NFT artist, or a digital artist coming out of the NFT space, Ocean World, and he makes video games, virtual worlds, augmented reality worlds, totally full of color, full of fun, but also very critical on American commercialism. So in the museum, there's a giant canvas that's 370 square meters where you can stand in and you can play his video game. So you jump over fireballs, you sit down in his meditation, but you also get a commercial break where he's very critical about metaverses, VR chat, etc., etc. And what you can then do in the space is you scan a QR code and all of his augmented reality creatures are popping up. And he's incredibly famous on TikTok and Instagram for his creatures. And what you can do is, again, answer a few questions by a chatbot, collect a digital memory, so you own a piece of the work. And you can then enter his video game with your own avatar, meeting other people globally who also play his video game. So you've played it physically, but you can actually then, with your phone, go home or on in your VR headset, actually play the video game with friends from all over the world in a global way, in a global community way. And I think for us, this was such a hard thing to crack, because how do you bridge the gap between physical and digital? You don't want to recreate the artwork. You want people to go a level deeper, but you also don't want to make it dry and purely text-based or functional. So how do you then, meet the artist by actually going into his work in a game environment? I think it's a really, really interesting example of how to do it.
And I think this brings another point that we oftentimes said, like, that NFTs really flattened what digital art is really all about. Digital art is nothing new. Computer art started in the 50s, 60s. And it's oftentimes like very complex, and you mentioned, for example, there's like a video game element, there's an augmented reality component. Like sometimes with software art, you have the whole algorithm, the software, like many different pieces. And then the news reduced like the NFT to a JPEG. But I think this is like very important to bring us back to what's important and what you are actually working on, all three of you, like to really display these components. And then yes, NFT is a format and something that you can transact these works with, but it's really not important.
I think what was also interesting is we've given Ocean World the space and the time. So in the world of, he was selling his NFTs, and it's happened so quickly. You could see him in the middle of 25 other screens with 25 other works for one afternoon, and then you buy it and it's gone. And we actually gave him this canvas for 6 months, and he got the opportunity to make a 45-minute work. So he was so excited about this because he gets to make these JPEGs. He gets to make, he's limited to the amount of seconds, to the amount of sound, to the amount of MBs you can upload. And this was for him the first time he could actually tell his curatorial story in a kind of more, in a museum type space. And people could go there for 6 months and not just one afternoon and it's gone and there's 15 other works you need to look at.
How do you deal with that, Seb, at ACMI, like between the virtual and physical engagement?
Sure. So we have 4 gallery spaces, 4 large-ish gallery spaces. So, and we also have a web gallery called Gallery 5. So Gallery 5 is where we've had the Xanthi Dobby work I mentioned previously, but probably the Fire Pit Collective one is the most relevant here. Those ones that exist similar to what we just heard from Meryl, that we will commission an artist and they will make a work for a particular physical space and or a web space, which will last for months at a time minimum. And that allows people to get time with the work and time to come across the work. And I think that's really important, as Meryl was saying, that this sort of notion of of switching in and out doesn't give works time to have their impact on you as a viewer, or for you to learn the interaction models for it and with it. So back in 2003, I was saying, when the museum first opened at Federation Square, it commissioned Julian Oliver to make this thing called Select Parks, or I used CMI Park, and that's now in our collection. And what that was a virtual reproduction of the museum in the space, but as kind of you were saying, it didn't apply the traditional limits or rules of the physical space. There was a bowling alley built in the middle of it, and you could play and do all these other things. You would fly around in the space. What was interesting there was, and you could also communicate with people physically in the gallery as well. So it was a physical and virtual collaboration, the sort of things that we talk about now with excitement. But what was interesting there was the challenges we still face today were faced then too. So around content moderation and moderation of that community as they spoke to each other through that virtual world. So I think looking back, and this is one of the luxuries my museum has because it has a collection that goes back decades, is to draw out the longer stories in digital art and to draw the connections between historical works that are not more than 10, 15, 20 years old, maybe 30, 40 years old. But the younger works are often not all that well explored. And there's a lot of amazing work then that speaks to exactly the same challenges of now. And it's interesting to see the lack of documentation and visibility of early Web 1 and Web 2 out beyond, obviously Rhizome's amazing work, but this is all work that needs time with it. And there's a lot, I think, that younger digital artists could learn from those earlier creators, and also many of the challenges that they faced are the same but challenges now. And we see this in VR, we see this in other XR works too, that a lot of the challenges are the same. We haven't actually moved beyond what used to be challenging 20, 30 years ago, which I find interesting. It's like it's all new, but it's actually not new. The problems are exactly the same.
And I think this is you mentioned the word context, right? Like it's important to see how a work any work like digital painting fits in a larger context. And because things go so fast in crypto and the technology, we tend to every 6 months it's like, oh, we're the first. We're we're the first. And nah, it was done 17 years ago, not with the blockchain or anything, but it needs to move the needle forward. You need to know your past to know your future. No,
definitely.
And but Poppy, I think this is an interesting question, how being a purely virtual ecosystem for you, how do you manage to carve that time and space to tell these stories? Because at the end of the day, it's not really about the technology, but what it allows, or what stories and what art it really allows you to show, really.
Actually, it's X-Virtual is not merely a virtual project. We do have physical installations in the museum as well. I think pretty much like Sab and Mary just mentioned, and our team also stands on the common ground. We believe physical works and virtual works are not interchangeable, and virtual art cannot, in any sense, being fully converted or transcribed into a physical counterpart. And it's as Sab said, it's always we're not going to stop at a reproduction of a gallery space, and how does it, the question is how do we go beyond it? And because we commission virtual worlds, the virtual work first, and we think about how it may serve as a backbone or a foundation for physical work to be built upon. And the essential question for us remains how a physical element that we commissioned that is related to the virtual one, but simultaneously offer something that can only be experienced on site with the physical installation and in the museum, because we both believe like at the end of the day it's all about like people gathering together and sensing and sharing together, and so that we can like have some collective memories that are it is about the local community themselves, and in respect to the curatorial, we are trying to like create multiple layers of engagement, you know, like for online and offline visitors. As I said, the X Virtual whole platform is built on Mozilla Hubs, and it allows like for multiple like ways to connect to. Like you can connect to the Mozilla Hubs of X Virtual through Web VR, and you can use customized avatars, use spatial audio, and you can even use like chat box to text other players online at the same time, but without VR. So that's our limitations. Yeah. And of course, like physical installations will provide some other contextualizations. And the idea is really about like how visitors can see different sides of the project, and then they are able to like puzzle the whole project together with how much they have engaged in.
Yeah, no, very, very interesting. And so we have 4 minutes left, and I want to ask each of you maybe an unusual question, like not what do you see in the future, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Not my question.
Thank you.
But more like, have you implemented or have you seen a project like a blockchain-based NFT or metaverse project that you're thinking about for your institution, or that could be applied to other art institutions, and that are not like the obvious choices like digital postcards, for example? Meryl?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, because I'm quite critical about a lot of stuff that I've seen, and that's exactly why we are testing and learning, because I feel like there's so much to explore. I am quite interested in some of the DAOs, so decentralized autonomous organizations that I've seen, because that could be a way to build museum collections in a more democratic way and make people and your community part of that collection. The only thing that I've also seen is that if the DAO has their own token, and if the token becomes more scarce, let's say, the value goes up, and then you lose your actually inclusive position as a museum where it needs to be approachable. So
it becomes a financialized autocracy.
And then it becomes everything that this whole utopian vision was not geared up for and does not want. So I am interested in the notion of DAOs, and some of the DAOs collecting really interesting art. And I also like some of the initiatives where they do utility NFTs well. So the benefits that you get is not like unlimited access, for example, but the benefits when you actually have one of the NFTs is that you can participate in a research project, or is that you can actually, without just coming to the museum, but also support the practice of a certain artist, for example, and influence the practice of a certain artist.
Seb, what about you?
Oh, look, very similar to Meryl. I'm interested in DAOs, and I'm interested in how DAOs don't necessarily become a technological way of keeping a community together. I think what's interesting in the more interesting space of DAOs is where smart contracts are not just used as a way of a means of enforcement, but are actually used to build real community relationships in human terms. The automation of things is something that has both positive and very negative effects, and I think that's one of the things, particularly as we're emerging from the pandemic, is this sort of how do we build a world based on trust that we want, rather than one that normalizes distrust and uses computation to get around human problems. You know, I think it is what I'm seeing in more of the progressive DAO space is people actually coming back to these notions of how do we form and live in communities together.
Yeah, really, like how do you? I mean, this is DAO is a technical term, but this is really about new governance and new ways of voting and making decisions. That is fascinating. Poppy, what about you?
That's it.
What do you think, if you have one use case that you would like to highlight, Web3 based, that might not be obvious to everybody?
Yeah, I think DAOs is absolutely like a very broad and flexible and potential space to we can even see DAOs as a conceptual like art practice or even social art practice, because it's always about like making that communities and how sustainable it can be. So I'm just prior to this meeting, I'm thinking about like very fundamental thing. Like for institution, like the biggest problems was always thinking about how our projects are being funded. And I'm not gonna lie, like how are we going to fundraise for all the programs and all the immaterial labor behind it? So just because X Virtual is still like an infant, is still very young, and we're still maturing our platform, and we hope to have our like artistic community before we have that DAO community. Hence, we are not yet involved in NFTs. But DeFi, decentralized finance, definitely like for us can provide alternative ways in terms of how we can have a sustainable funding for the project, and how this project can just keep the ball like rolling by itself.
Yeah, and so on that note, thank you all. I think the round of applause for our three panelists. And I think there's something to leave you with. I think there's a lot of technology jargon. Yes, it's very early. But I think this is like, it doesn't matter, right? Like if you see an experience at any, which I hope you visit all of these three amazing institutions, but if something like catch your eye and you get maybe like a little glimpse of what like the possibilities are, and if it is exciting, then they're doing it right. If you don't understand it, you're not alone, and this is not on you. Like this is, you know, on us to clarify. So enjoy the experiment, I think is what I would like to say to finish the panel, because it's early, so it's confusing, but it's magic. So, all right, thank you very much. Thank you, Seb and Poppy, for joining remotely.
Yeah.